Welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity, and making meaning. Today, I'm joined by Bear Lawrence. He's the author of the Embleton Murders, a DCI Parrish Crime Thriller. I'm just trying to get my words out. I'm a bit knackered this morning, so you'll have to bear with me. Bear with me. Um,
It,
so
it's
yeah,
fine. It's
thanks for
fine. I'm the
joining us,
same.
Bear. Your book was this book was published not too long ago, so it involves uh, a murders, crime, a detective who is retired and has got ME. So it's a really interesting sort of combination. And what's fascinating for me is that it's sort of like set sort of like in my part of the world, so I could kind of like relate and link to sort of quite a few of the places and things. So I just thought it'd be good to
Yeah.
start by
Yeah.
reading a couple of reviews that have been left kind of fairly recently on your book. A couple of 5-star reviews. One person says twists and turns, a really good read for the writer's first crime novel. Bear delivers again in a whole new way. Good scene setting, characters and plot. It's the thing you get from reading a book, something you learn, something to think about. It took longer than I thought because Bear's words made me stop and think. That's what a good book does. There's a truth with everything he's written, and this book doesn't disappoint. Can't wait to read what DCI Parrish gets involved in next. And somebody else says, a detective with ME, CFS, brilliant, more please. I read this book in only a few days. That's saying a lot as I have ME as well as the author and detective. Thank you, Bear, for writing a thrilling crime novel. I can relate to DCI Parrish's limitations and the pull and tug of this disease. I enjoyed Parrish's reasoning skills. Also, you've inspired me to get a laptop so I can return to my novels from bed. I have two that I've put on hold, but would love to get back to. If you can do it, so can I. And that's like really encouraging, isn't it? To sort of like that people kind of it's made people think about their own kind of creativity and thinking about, despite the limitations, what they can achieve. So, um, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and sort of your chronic illness experience? What was life like before ME, and what does it look like now, and how you became ill?
Sure. I, Life was pretty exciting, really, before I got ill. I've done lots of things. I've lived in several countries. Um, you know, Probably one of the most exciting phases of my life was being a helicopter pilot and living in Oregon, Norway, and the Caribbean. And then the latter half of my career, I was flying in the northeast of England mainly. So I've flown over Northumberland many times, and that was one of the reasons for choosing Embleton as the location for the book. Um, when did I get ME? I went. I retired from flying in 2016. I was thoroughly sick of it. As you do it more and more, you get promoted and promoted, and you end up doing more
Mm.
administration. And the paperwork and dealing with the Civil Aviation Authority really took all the joy out of it for me. Um, so I worked part time as a university lecturer, and I was loving life. And then the university had a great big reorganisation, and they were getting rid of anybody who was working part time. So the options were going to be for me: don't have a job or go full time if they offered it to me. And they did offer me the full time position, and I really didn't like it because I got promoted and I took on more administrative duties, and you do less of the teaching, and it takes all the joy out of it. It's a recurring theme, this, I
Mm.
guess. Um,
Mm.
and I went off work in July 2019. I don't really want to spoil it. A lot of this story is in the book, actually, isn't it? You've read it, so you'll be
Right.
familiar.
Mm.
And so I'll just say I was suffering from stress. I got a viral infection, and I was in bed for 7 weeks. And probably the easiest thing to say is I've never recovered. And it was a
Mm.
5 months later I was diagnosed with ME, and probably a year or two later fibromyalgia, because I was then in a lot of pain and pretty much all over my body. And when I was diagnosed, it was pre new NICE guidelines, and graded exercise therapy was recommended for me by my GP. And at the time, I really, really was struggling to read anything. I was really had a lot of mental health problems and stress. So I just followed that, and I went out and mowed the lawn, and then cut the hedge, or I went on my motorbike on the hills and rode further and further, and walked my dog a bit more, and I just got worse and worse and worse.
Mm.
And in the first instance, I just thought, I'm making myself worse. So let's stop, have a break for the winter, and restart again in the spring, which is what I did. And I pushed and pushed and pushed, and got worse and worse and worse. But um,
Mm.
at some point, I did start to try and read little bits and pieces, particularly on ME forums, and I found out that pushing yourself was the worst thing you could do, and I needed to pace. And that was probably my lowest point, but it did last a very long time, because you know yourself, you don't miraculously get better.
Mm.
But I've got to a point where life's more enjoyable now, and I can do a few things, so that's good. Have I
Mm.
answered that question? I forget what you asked me.
Yeah, no, no, no. It's just yeah, like this sort of like yeah, life and how it impacts you in the ME, and it's interesting. Yeah, and we all have kind of like different paths through it and different kind of like stages, don't we? And
Yeah,
it's how it impacts us and how we try and manage that, despite kind of everything. And yeah, the graded exercise thing is so dangerous, and it's yeah, like it feels frustrating that like for you, you've been impacted by that in a really negative way that sort of set you back quite a bit, and that seems to be a recurring theme, doesn't it, for so many people in
yeah,
terms of like what the medical advice is and or has been in the past. And um we're still sort of seeing the effects of that, and whether it's going to take quite a big cultural change despite the guidelines, isn't it, in terms of kind of where things are heading. But yeah, so do you want to tell us a bit about, you've written some other things about Emmy as well, do you want to tell us a bit about things that you've written prior to the Embleton murders?
yeah. Of course. This is a little book called Me and My ME, but it's the article within this called Me and My ME was the first thing that I wrote. Uh, my original plan, I was getting really frustrated not being able to articulate the illness to friends and family, or
Mm.
perhaps for them not to grasp what I was saying to them. And I decided that I would produce a presentation that I would give to the local WI meeting, or the local whatever society. And I chose that because I've been a university lecturer. Giving a lecture or a talk is,
Mm.
meat and drink for me. And my style of doing a lecture would be a combination of images and text, maybe a video, because people learn in different ways. Um, I was trying to give different forms of information, so at least as many people would grab it as possible. But doing that, particularly if you're using imagery, requires quite a bit of memory to remember the words that go with the images.
Mm.
And I was trying to put this thing together, and when I was practicing, reading it out and giving it, I just couldn't remember what I was supposed to say. And I went to see my GP, and in the course of meeting her about something else, I mentioned this, and she just quite simply said, "Why don't you write an article?" And I thought, "Why have I never thought of that?"
Mm.
So I live in a little village, and the village I live in, and some local ones have formed part of a parish, and there's a parish newsletter. I forgot to get one of them to hand to show you. Um, And I thought maybe I could write something to go in there. So I got in touch with the editor, and they said, "Oh, we love people to write pieces. We don't get enough. That's great." And they gave me a limit of 2 sides of A5. So I wrote an article, and I emailed it to them. They said, "That's great. It's going to take so many weeks for it to appear because I'd just missed the deadline for the latest one. It's a monthly publication, so it's going to be almost 2 months before it would land on my doormat. And I tend to be a bit impatient, so I thought, right, I'll publish it on a ME forum on Facebook. And within a couple of weeks, it had been read thousands of times, and there was loads of likes and loves and comments. And I thought that's great. And there was a few comments like suggesting, like, "Oh, did you not mention this, or could you have mentioned that?" So I rewrote it, and I was now free from the A5 limitation. Um,
Mm.
but with a short concentration, poor memory that we all have, um, I didn't increase the word length, but I was able to redesign the way it appeared so it was easier to read. And I honed it, and it proved quite popular. So I wrote another one about something different. I think it was about motorbikes and helicopters. I can't remember now. And then I wrote another one and another one. And I eventually had 10 of them. So I wrote the backstory to each of the articles and threaded them together and published Bear With Me. And that was my first book. And that's still remains popular. I'm fairly sure the Embleton Murders will, sell more copies and hit a wider general public, but that's another thing altogether. Uh, I'm getting a bit lost. What were you asking me again?
No, it's yeah, the bear with me stuff. It's interesting. It's helpful. I didn't have a look at them, but it's I can really relate to your sort of feelings about wanting to kind of like write your experience, because when I first became ill, I blogged quite a bit, and I was kind of like
Yeah,
writing quite a bit. And when I first became ill, it was probably about a year or so before you. It was sort of 2018. I just had this like need to kind of write quite a lot about my experience,
yeah,
and then over the last sort of few years, I've noticed like my sort of like cognitive functioning has sort of declined a bit, and like I don't have this sort of same inspiration to write about ME in the same way, because sometimes I just don't know what to write anymore, because I feel like I've written a lot and my blog's there if people want to go and see it. But I think it's an important part of the process, isn't it, in terms of like needing to sort of educate other people, but also kind of like processing your own experience through writing. And I think that's kind of really what you've done, but also with the Embleton Murders as well. It's a really interesting way that you've done it. Do you want to tell us a bit about kind of your thought processes behind that, and kind of um, what drew you to sort of like write a sort of crime fiction? And is it something that you enjoy reading yourself, or is it something that you just thought, oh, I'll kind of like delve into this? How did that come about?
uh, I might not remember all the different bits of the question by the time we get to the end, but
Sorry.
I'll tell you how it started. It was during writing of Bear With Me. Um, I realised I'd have more effect of raising awareness by writing a book that anybody might wish to read, the general public. But I hadn't even written Bear With Me, so being able to write a novel, which I'd never done before, was far too far away. But I was having ideas, and I had two concepts. One was called My Aber Obsession, and it was a romance, and at least one of the characters would have ME, possibly two, but definitely a female character, because we're too many, but it's a largely prevalent in women, this illness, unfortunately.
Mm.
And I also thought I'd like to do a crime thriller, because I don't really read romances, but well, I don't read anything now because I struggle to read. But I used to read crime
Mm.
thrillers, and I had an idea for this Italian professor at a university, and he was called Professor Fibromyalgia, and he was kind of a comedy figure in my head. Anyway, I published Bear With Me, and I discovered that there's a lady in the village where I live who's a successful author in her own right. and she read the book and she started mentoring me. And
Mm.
lots of people were interested in writing, so she held a little workshop, and in it, I learnt how to develop a character for a novel. And I had the idea for DCI Parrish, so I started padding him out in my mind. What does he look like? What does he like to eat? What car does he drive? Where does he live? And things like that. And time has now passed, and we're into 2024. So I had the 2023, sorry, and I had the original idea in 2022. And so I had my character, but I didn't know how to write a novel. So I literally Googled, how do you write a detective book? And
Mm.
there's quite a lot of suggestions. And I started watching lots of crime programs on the television, which I like anyway. But I started to understand, right, so Columbo is that style of detective story, and Frost is that one, I suddenly understood what I was doing. Um, so I started writing the Embleton Murders. Really, yeah. Does that answer
Mm.
your
Yeah, because
question?
they sort of yeah, no, it's almost like because often they sort of follow a bit of a template, don't they? So it's kind of
Yeah,
like you're writing in a particular sort of genre, and it's interesting, yeah, that that's kind of like you've sort of thought about kind of like what will because I mean I don't read a lot of fiction now, and I read when I first got ill, I had sort of time on my hands, but I also had like I was saying more cognitive functions. So I sort of read about 40 books in about a year and a half. I was reading quite a bit,
wow,
um, and I don't think I've read a fiction probably for last 3 or 4 years because I I struggle with sort of following a storyline. I struggle with kind of like keeping track of characters, who's who, that sort of thing.
yeah,
Um,
totally understand that.
and I tend to sort of, if I read, I tend to read non-fiction because I can kind of dip into it and sort of learn something kind of interesting, but then sort of dip out of it again, and I might not pick it up for a while. But I did make
Yeah,
a sort of effort to sort of read your book, and because I knew you were
thank
going to
you.
talk, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed particularly because it was sort of based in my area as well, which was sort of fascinating. Um, but yeah, just reading something different for a change, and yeah, sort of like it was reminiscent of it felt like reading or like reading a detective TV program that maybe like sort of back from the 80s or 90s or something like that.
Yeah,
It was it was certainly interesting. And what I appreciated was kind of like the way that Parrish was as somebody with ME, kind of how he was portrayed, and I could really sort of like identify with the quite a bit of his kind of how he was feeling and how he responded to things and how his ME impacted him. Do you want to tell us a bit about how you went about writing him and sort of trying to find the right balance for him as a character and his illness?
yeah, sure. He had to be more active than me because I'm not very mobile. Um,
Mm.
but other than that, when you're writing a novel, it requires a lot of energy, mental energy, and quite a bit of emotional energy. Because I really
Mm.
put myself, how is that character thinking and reacting to what they're seeing and what's going around? So in the course of writing it, I would get a bit of brain fog or pain, or my alarm would go off to get my next tablet. So I just literally go, oh, his alarm's gone off, and he goes and gets a tablet. So it meant it was really quite easy to make it a real experience of living with ME. Yeah. So apart from the mobility aspect, because he's a more active character than I am in real life, it's very much how I might have been feeling at that time, or perhaps on that morning when I woke up, or you know, within a very short
Mm.
period of time of writing those very words.
So it's quite, yeah, you've almost like placed yourself and your lived experience into that
Yeah.
character, which is interesting. And was it difficult to get it right? Like you say, he was more sort of mobile than you, and in terms of like the impact of like doing things on him, and because one thing I found was like, uh, I sort of wondered whether, and it's a reflection on sometimes how we sort of manage or don't manage our own ME, because sometimes we like push ourselves way too hard to achieve something um when it might not be wise for us to do that in terms of our like energy output. And um the book almost starts with a sort of like a microcosm of his life, doesn't it, in terms of what
Yeah,
he's managing, his own sort of quite closed environment, and how
yeah,
he manages his
yeah,
day-to-day living. And then all of a sudden this kind of like case comes in. He's a retired detective, but he's interested in cases that happen, ongoing cases and things, and his approach to sort of help solve this case.
yeah,
And then all of a sudden, his kind of like world opens up a bit, and he like he sort of ends up traveling like 2 hours on his scooter, and I'm sat there thinking, you've just like sort of gone on your scooter for 2 hours, like, and you can see the impact of that afterwards because he spends
yeah,
days in bed because of it. But also from like as somebody with ME, I'm thinking, don't do that. You should have got like the
yeah.
train or something. Like is there an element of that you were sort of like playing with this notion that often we can push ourselves? Was he pushing himself too hard to try and solve the case? Was there an element of that for yourself in how often we kind of experience our illness in terms of wanting to achieve something, but also kind of like it not being helpful to us in the long run somehow?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I guess everybody, or almost everybody, be it chronically ill or otherwise, they have things happen in their life that they're not expecting. You know,
Mm,
a loved one gets a cancer diagnosis, for instance, and and when you have ME, you know, emotional energy takes it out of you as much as physical or mental, and you,
mm,
although you can pace yourself as well as you can't avoid your young daughter getting ill and being upset for her,
mm,
or your son getting bullied at school, you know, and you just have to absorb all that as best you can and deal with it. And sometimes you have periods in your life where you run on adrenaline for a little bit
mm,
to get through them. So I just kind of took that notion that he, he's emotionally involved because people are getting killed or murdered, possibly. I don't want
mm.
to do it,
Yeah, not no
spoil
spoilers.
it. Um, so it's that emotional element that he feels he wants to stop what's going on, or solve the case. Plus, he misses being a detective, and he gets a real excitement
Mm,
out of doing it. And I very deliberately wrote in at the, well, I don't want to spoil it again, but he's given a 1 or 2 week window to solve
mm,
this thing. And I would have think, as a detective, if he was offered that, he'd think, right, I can do that. I can do that. If I try and rest before it starts, and I accept I'm going to be, you know, maybe crash afterwards. But that sometimes that might be an acceptable, you know, balance for him, a compromise.
mm,
So that's kind of the approach I took
mm,
to that. Yeah, yeah. If that answers the question,
mm.
I'm terrible at remembering.
No, it's fine. It's good. I just thought it was like it was interesting that yeah, sort of finding that balance, and it is a fine balance. And y- there was another character that almost like challenged him on, his own illness, and I thought the way that he then sort of like expressed the lived experience back to this character was really good, in the sense of like, well, sometimes I can do things, but other times it's going to impact me, and I can't do things.
Yeah,
And I think that's I thought that was really well done, because often within society, like we're seen, sometimes we're seen out doing things, and then other times we're hidden away for like really long periods of time. And I think um it's taking the opportunities, and finding that sort of balance in terms of like quality of life, isn't it? In terms of
yeah,
what we can achieve versus like self-preservation. And I think that was kind of reflected um really well. Did you Did you enjoy writing the book? Did it start to feel like a burden to you, or was it like, how did you manage the writing process with, like you say, sort of the cognitive dysfunction that comes, and how you sort of like kept the plot together, and because it was kind of like really tightly written. I feel in terms of like it was readable and it wasn't too long, and it felt kind of like a nice length. But how was that for you writing it?
God, so many ways I could answer that. Oh, so I Bear with Me is about 25,000 words. It's what we call a novella, and that was
Mm,
all I could have managed at the time. And my next book, I've got one here. Bear in mind, that's 56,000, I think, something like that. And a novel is considered to be 50,000 words plus, and very often the different genres have different lengths. So now I'm making this up now, but a romance might be 80 to 100,000 words. Crime might be 80 to 120. But realistically, for me, 50,000, like, it's hard enough to write a book. So I thought, and it's
mm,
also, although I want the general public to read it, I want people with ME to read it as well. And
mm,
if I give them a great big thick book, you're not even going to start. So it needs to
mm.
be physically possible to read it. Um, yeah, you're asking me about writing it. So yeah, it is hard to write. It takes dedication. Um, Somebody did a phrase online the other day asking me about this, and it was beautiful what they wrote. Because I said it's like little and often, and they said it's as natural as breathing to write. Um,
Mm.
I don't think it is quite that, but it was a lovely way this lady had written it. But so I try and write nearly every day, but I shouldn't say write. I should say working on the book. So sometimes it's just thinking through concepts, and I have bits of paper with timelines and like how does that character know that character, and
Mm.
you're very generous in saying it was tightly written. Um, and I think that's because I have these bits of paper, um, and I might only write for an hour at a time or 2 hours. And what I've learned to do is right at the end of finished writing, I write what I'm about to write next. So because
Mm.
when I first started writing it, I was having to go back and read what I'd written to remember what I'd written to work out where I was going.
Mm.
But now, by just saying,
Yeah.
right, you're now going to write that, I don't have to read back,
Mm.
because I'm writing that note in the present. So when I come back in the future to read it, right, I just have to trust that I've written the correct thing, if that makes sense.
Mm.
But the book
Yeah.
itself,
Yeah.
I started writing it in the April last year in 2023, and I wrote about 20,000 words, so a good chunk of the book. And I'd really worn myself out, so I decided to take a break. And I was going to have the summer riding my motorbike, seeing my friends, and walking the dog. And when I'm not laid on the couch or laid in bed like our
Mm.
lives are. Um, but last summer was really rainy in the UK, so I went back to the book and I read those first few chapters. And I don't like saying this, but I really liked them. I know it's my
Mhm.
writing, but I really enjoyed them. But I thought there's something really missing here, and that's something I haven't written, uh, like a pre-chapter, and that's the first chapter in the book. And I wrote it, and I really didn't like it. So my editor read it, give me feedback, and my other half read it, and a couple of other people unusually share. I don't normally share that much with the writing, and nobody liked it. And I kept
Mm.
rewriting it, and I'm not over keen with what it is, but I think it's a nice start into the book, isn't it? Um, Gives you a little hook.
Mm.
Um, so I then I felt like almost exhausted again with that. Um, but it dawned on me that I can't write one book. the Embleton Murders, I need to write several for it to be a series,
Mm.
and to it's generally considered by authors that you need to write at least 6 books before you get an audience, because it's like a
Wow.
snowball. Yeah. So I thought, right, I'm going to write
Mm.
6 books. So before I write any more of the Embleton Murders, I need to develop another 5 core ideas. And I did that. One of them, I even wrote 8,000 words of it. Um, and then I went back and wrote the Embleton Murders. And then I was able then to drop into the story lots of things that will relate in future books. So you've read them. At least one thing you realise is going to come up in another book.
Mm.
I don't want to spoil it, but there's something, isn't there?
Mm.
Um, but there's actually, you've read a lot of things that you don't realise will pop up later on.
Yeah. Um, I was going to ask about. It was really an interesting sort of take to write yourself into the book. So there's a character with your
Yeah,
name,
yeah.
and what was the thinking behind that? Because that was I don't think I've ever read a book where the author's literally in the book in a sense, like in a way. So like, how did that kind of like crop up, and was that something that was deliberate, or did it just kind of like was it just an inspired thing that happened, or what was he thinking?
Um, right. This is, bear in mind, and this is the first book of all my books that I started writing, and it is a true version of events of my parts of my life. But the names have been changed and locations to protect the innocent and the guilty, as it were. And I wrote it because a lot of my friends encouraged me to write it, because I've been treated very unfairly by an employer, former employer. And
Mm.
I hoped it would be cathartic, but it actually wasn't. It was just really painful to
Mm.
write. So the reason didn't become the first book, because I just, it was so painful to write. I had to write "Bear with Me" before
Mm.
I gained enough strength to go back and write it, and it wasn't cathartic. And I wanted some sort of revenge on the organisation and the people who treated me so unfairly, and I used that to dream up the plot of the Embleton Murders by killing
Ah,
off
okay.
some of the main protagonists in the story. Um, and what really gave me the idea for this is, this isn't a spoiler because it says it on the back of the book. There's 2 mysterious deaths of staff at
Mm.
work at Embleton University, and one of those was a person who involved who generally he did die. I've no idea what he died of, or and I very much doubt it was a death, as it happened in the Embleton Murders. Um, but yeah, I thought, right, yeah, I've now in real life I've got a terrible, tragic story, but a true thing, and the character has died. So, right, who else would I like to kill and and get revenge on? So, I hope that doesn't sound too bitter, but that's how I got the inspiration for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, that's really interesting. And so so sort of like going forwards, like um you've got sort of another 5 books that you're kind of like gonna be you've got a sort of about like an outline for, and are those gonna sort of like develop DCI Parrish's kind of like character and how he manages his ME, and that's going to be sort of central for him, I suppose, as a character, isn't it? In terms of like his lived experience with ME and how he sort of like goes forward. So, you've got quite a clear plan for that, have you?
Um, I wouldn't say I had a clear plan. That would be giving me too much credit.
Yeah.
But um, in my own personal experience in life, and now life with ME, is I reflect on things and try to improve my performance in the future, or make my life more comfortable, or whatever, more very much more efficient, because um, if I know I need to go upstairs for something, I'll have a think and like, is there some other reason I need to go upstairs so I don't go up and down the
Mm,
stairs a couple of times? As a little example. So yeah, so Parrish learns from some of his experiences in the Embleton Murders, and I'm almost halfway through Recognition Man, which is the second book, and he he does something. I don't want to spoil it, but you know, something I find hard is holding a telephone and having a telephone conversation. My arm gets fatigued really quickly, so
mm,
that's the kind of sort of thing you might think about and like, how can I make life better for myself? Um,
mm.
and that's made me think of something. If you don't mind me veering off track briefly,
No, go
um,
for it.
I think sometimes people think uh, I seem to write very fast and I'm quite productive with my books, which might be true, but they actually start you start writing them a very long time before they get published. So, Recognition Man, I started writing in September last year. So, Embleton Murders was published in January. So, you're already writing the next book before the
Mm,
first one's published because there's a cover design, proofreading, editing, uh, publishing. So there's quite a lot of stuff involved that actually I'm not always involved that much in it, necessarily. So I can just crack on with writing the next book, really.
mm, mm.
Sorry for veering
Yeah,
off.
it's no, no, it's interesting to sort of learn about that side of the process as well. So, um, yeah, no, I really it's been really good to kind of like think about and learn about your sort of like your thought processes around the book, and I'd really encourage people if people want to sort of read something different. It wasn't too onerous for me to read. I quite enjoyed it. It was something different. And yeah, particularly I think for ME representation in something in a different form was really needed, and I think I'm really hopeful that you kind of sell loads of copies and that people will kind of like grasp a bit more about what it's like, and I think the big thing was you know the post-exertional malaise and the way that it impacted was really well written, and I think a lot of people will be able to sort of like identify with that. So yeah, like thank you for writing it really, and
No,
and um and
my pleasure.
and I hope the series goes on to to be a real success, and yeah, and what's interesting is like quite a few of your reviews I noticed on Amazon were in America as well, so obviously there's
Yeah,
kind of like a big audience there that's to tap into as well, isn't there?
yeah. Oh, you've said some wonderful things. One, the two reviews you read out, actually, one was from Australia and one was from America. Um,
Mm,
and Amazon give me a little dashboard with certain statistics, so I can see it where I can sometimes see where it's being bought, the book. So I know it's sold in America, Canada, Ireland, the UK, Norway, Sweden, Germany, Italy, Netherlands.
wow.
You know, so that's really really encouraging. Um, And the other really encouraging thing is a different audience is buying the book to the that bought Bear with Me. Uh,
Right.
my gut feel is a lot of people who bought Bear with Me are friends and family initially, and a
Mm,
lot of the ME community. Um, but the Amazon tell you if it's sold as a paperback, a Kindle, or there's a few other ways of which you can buy it and read it. Some, like for example, if you have a subscription to Kindle, so
mm,
they pay a monthly fee, but that would kind of be
mm.
unfair to authors. So Amazon pay you for every page that's read.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
it remains unfair because the amount they pay you is so small, it's not worth
Yeah.
having. But
Mm,
what it's allowed me to do is compare Bear with Me with the Embleton Murders, and
mm,
uh, I've got, well, actually, no pages have been read on this monthly subscription thing where there was quite a lot on Bear With Me. And the ratio of Kindle to paperback is markedly different. So there's a different readership. So
Mm.
Bear With Me, for every Kindle copy, there was 5 paperbacks. And Embleton Murders, I haven't looked recently, but it's more like 1-to-1 or 2-to-1.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
that's it. Indicates to me it's a different audience. Whether that's the general public, I
Mm.
can't say, but it's encouraging. I think as a differentiator. And
Mm.
the just looking at the rate of orders is similar for the 2 books, but the Embleton Murders, it's still early days. I published it in mid-January. We're not even, it's March
Mm.
tomorrow, but I think it might have a
Mm.
bit more longevity. Um,
Mm.
so wait and see, and that's why really, unfortunately, I've sent myself the mountain of writing 6 books. Um,
People will be waiting for the next one, won't they? So yeah,
yeah,
it's. But
yeah,
I guess, like you say, the hope is that it'll build up, sort of like, yeah, it'll build up kind of like interest as the more that you sort of like release further books. So,
yeah.
yeah,
The other thing,
um,
probably, I don't know whether it's worth mentioning, but I can't remember when I started writing, 2021 maybe, and published at the end of 2022. I know what royalties I'm going to get from January and February for the Embleton Murders, and it will probably be like July, August before I eventually break even with all the money I've put into
right.
publishing my book so far. That there's special software you have to buy, illustrations, and what all the money that Amazon take out of you. So here's a spoiler alert: don't become an author; you won't get rich from it. But my purpose
Yeah.
is to raise awareness. It's not a monetary purpose, but the sale
Mm.
of books represents an element of success in raising awareness. If that makes sense.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. I do feel for authors who, especially when you hear about kind of like what level of sort of, for everything that you put into it, what you actually monetarily get back from it is, it must feel frustrating at times. But yeah, like we appreciate the what you're putting into it, and yeah, I wish you all the best. Is there anything else that you'd like to add
Thank
before we
you.
finish?
Yeah, we spoke before we started this recording, and I got a number of little props that I thought might come up. I mean, I've showed you a couple of books, but the one I wanted to show you, I think I missed the opportunity to show you, but it's worth showing, I think. Um, so for not every book, but most of the books I write, I make myself a T-shirt. It's my little enjoyment. So I made this one. I don't. Can you see that?
Yeah. So it
So
says I'm 100% Bear Lawrence and 85% DCI Parish. Yeah,
yeah,
it's very good.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it was answering your question of like, am I DCI Parish or not? So yeah, so he's mostly me, but he's 6 foot tall and I'm 5'8", and he's a lot more mobile than I am. And in the book, I'm Bear Lawrence and I am Bear Lawrence, and you've read the book, so you'll possibly recognise where I'm sat because that gets mentioned in the book.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's good, and yeah, like I just encourage people to if it's the sort of thing you're able to do, if it's the sort of thing that you sort of like are interested in, do go ahead and sort of get a copy. Like Bear said, it's paperback, it's Kindle. I'll put a link in the description for people for Amazon. Is there a recommendation for you in terms of where's best to buy the book from?
Well, it's only available at Amazon, but there's one thing I'd
Right.
like to add. It's not available as an audio book per se, but
Mm.
if you buy the Kindle version, if you can use Google Assistant, Bixby, Alexa, Siri, any of those computer assistants, and all you have to do is say something like, "Alexa, read the Embleton Murders from my Kindle library," and they will read
Ah,
it out to you. And it works. I've
okay.
tried it. You have to put up with the voice that you're getting, but
Yeah,
at least it makes the book accessible to some people that
yeah.
otherwise wouldn't be able to read it.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'll put the links in, and yeah, maybe it'd be good to talk in the future again when the next one's out. So
I'd
it's
love to.
yeah, I'll definitely be looking to read it. So but thanks for your time, and yeah, it's been good to talk.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Cheers.